The first decade of the 21st century has been one of great change. We have witnessed rapid globalization and technological change. We've also seen the rise of new world powers. This has led to questions about America's role in the world and how it can remain competitive. New York Times columnist Tom Friedman and Johns Hopkins professor Micheal Mandelbaum have co-authored a book on this subject. It is called That Used to Be Us: How America Fell Behind in the World It Invented and How We Can Come Back. I am pleased to have them here at this table. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
Here is the first question, though. Why are you quoting Micheal Mandelbaum so often in your column? I now know, because you talk to him all the time.
The book kind of outed our relationship.
Yes, it did.
It's Micheal and I have been intellectual friends for over 20 years, and we're neighbors.
Yeah.
And really, the book came about because we talk every day virtually, and we noticed, Charlie, over the last couple of years that we start talking about foreign policy, and we'd always end up talking about America. And we finally realized that America, its fate, future, vigor, vitality, is really the biggest foreign policy issue in the world. And we really couldn't continue talking about foreign policy until we really wrestled with that. And that's really what prompted the book.
And what's the book about, Micheal?
Well, the book is about the four major challenges that the United States faces: the challenges of globalization, the information technology revolution, our deficits and debt, not just at the federal but at the state and local levels, and the challenges posed by our pattern of energy consumption and its impact on the climate. Those four challenges and how we meet them and whether we meet them will determine America's economic growth in the future, and that in turn will determine the kind of society that we have. So the American dream, the ability to pass on a better life to the next generation, is at stake in how we cope with these four challenges which form the spine of the book, as is, as Tom said, the American role in the world. And unfortunately, we're not doing well. We're failing. We explain in this book what the challenges are, why we've been ignoring them, and what we need to do to bring America back to what it has been and should be.
We started this book. Micheal came over. We sat in my office, and as always, a book starts on the back of an envelope.
Right.
And but I think the best part of writing it, I think we both say, is what you discover along the way. And in one of the big things that I think we discovered, which I think makes this book, Charlie, in some ways, certainly for us, a how-to book. I mean, it's basically a how-to in the sense of it's a survival guide for parents, for educators, for business people, for government, how to navigate this world now. Because what we tried to do was start the conversation where we think the country should be starting the conversation now. What world are we living in? And what we realized as we got into the book was that we're not just living in a connected world. We're actually living in a hyper-connected world. That something's happened over the last few years in particular that has taken this connectivity story to a whole new level.
Something happened between Flat World 1.0 and Flat World 2.0.
The way we
right?
describe, exactly, the way we describe it is when we sat down to work on this, one day I called Micheal and said, I looked up, I got the first edition of The World is Flat, which I talked about here. I worked on that in 2004, I started it, and I looked under F, and Facebook wasn't in it. And as I've been telling people, when I started working on The World's Flat, I mean, Facebook basically didn't exist. Twitter was a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking place. LinkedIn was a prison. Applications were what you sent to college. And for most people, Skype was a typo. Yes. All of that changed, Charlie, in just the last 6 years.
And the impact of it changing?
The impact of it changing is that I think the most important impact for moms and dads, kids and employers is that the whole global curve has risen. The curve in the sense of what you need to do to have a good job. Let's look around this studio. There isn't a camera person here. Every one of these are robotic.
Right.
First time I was on this show, I think there are probably 7 or 8 camera people here. That's true across every industry and every occupation now. So we have a chapter in the book.
Productivity has led to change in work.
And so basically employers now, Charlie, have so much more access to automation, to robots, and to not just cheap labor, but cheap genius anywhere around the world. And so we have a chapter in the book summarizing that change. It's called Average is Over. Average is over. Woody Allen's old saying, 80 or 90% of life is showing up.
Yeah, right.
No. If you just show up now, you're not going to get the returns you might hope for.
You also say that the book begins with China, too, in part. It begins with China because?
Because China is, in the view of many Americans, forging ahead while we're falling behind. But what we say is that our nervousness about China is really a reflection of our discontent with ourselves. China is a vastly important factor in the world of the 21st century. But we don't need to imitate China. What we need to do in order to thrive in the 21st century is to get back to our own best traditions, our own best practices.
We don't want to be China, we want to be like we used to be.
We want to be like we used to be, and that's why a book about the American future and how to navigate it has a backward-looking title, That Used to Be Us. Because what we say is that if we look to our history, if we look to what we call our formula for a public-private partnership for success, which has 5 parts and goes back all the way to the beginning of the Republic, to Alexander Hamilton, if we look to basic American values that we've drifted away from, if we look at the essence of America, we will find that we have what it takes to master these challenges as long as we can get our act together. One message of the book is we can do it. The other message is here's what we have to do that we're not doing in order to thrive in the future.
And what do we have to do that we're not doing?
Well, there's a huge education challenge. In fact, almost a quarter of the book is taken up with education. Globalization and the IT revolution put enormous pressure on every job. There are 2 billion more people in the global workforce than there were 20 years ago. That creates enormous opportunities for the United States. It's a win-win situation, but there's much more competition for every job. And that means that everybody has to be better at his or her job. And it means that in order to solve our jobs crisis, we've got to invent more jobs, and the burden ultimately rests on our education system. We need more education, and we need better education, and we explain in the book what both involve in our view.
You also say we have to be either creative or a creative server.
Right.
Meaning?
This is a concept that a writer named Kessler in the Wall Street Journal, who we quote, coined. He said basically they're just creators and servers.
Right.
You know, he goes into more detail. That is, creators are people who invent and adapt and re-engineer things, and servers are the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, to put it crudely. And what we basically argue, Charlie, is that that's actually changed. That now, see, in the old days, you'd say, I'm a lawyer, I'm a creator. And now you have to be a creative lawyer. Right. Okay. In the old days, you might say, I'm a baker. Now you have to be a creative baker, okay? That it isn't just enough to say, my job is safe, I'm a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, or my job is safe, I'm a lawyer. Now, everyone, this was, for us, we have a chapter in the book called Help Wanted. Right. Because again, we tried to do this inductively. So we ran around to 4 generic employers. A high-end white-collar firm, the head of a Washington law firm, a national firm, Nixon Peabody. Low-end white-collar, the head of the outsourcing firm we actually started, The World is Flat. Blue-collar, Alan Coleman, the head of DuPont. And green-collar, the U.S. Army. And what we found from all 4 of these disparate employers is they're all looking for the same employee, Charlie. And what are they looking for? People who can do critical thinking and reasoning, ... to get an interview. Now they don't just want critical thinking and reasoning. They want to know, can you invent, reinvent, and re-engineer the job? Because when change is happening so fast, I need people who can not just do the job in a really smart way, but invent and re-engineer it. You got to be a creative creator or a creative server.
And that message is getting across, you think?
Everybody who runs a business who has to hire people understands this. But our society as a whole doesn't understand it well enough. And the evidence of that is that our education system is not producing the people with the skills that we need. And we have a lot to say about education. We have a whole section called the Education Challenge. And it boils down, I think, to 3 things. First, we've got 2 education problems. We've got to lift up the people at the bottom of the scale, because if they don't do better, they're not going to be employable under any circumstances. But we also have to get the average higher, because we're competing with people all over the world. So that's one point. Second point, just as war is too important to be left to the generals, so teaching is too important to be left to the teachers. That doesn't mean that teaching isn't important, and we have a lot to say about teaching, but it's a national problem. We can't just outsource this responsibility to teachers. The whole country has to make a commitment to better education. And in fact, we say in the book that this is our #1 national security challenge going forward. The third lesson we draw is that somehow we have to try to teach people to be creative servers or creators. And we have a whole chapter on different people who are trying to do that. We don't quite know how to do that, but that is an enormous responsibility of our education system going forward if we want to prepare people for the 21st century.
Another part of this is immigration.
Yeah, I mean, that's, Michael alluded to the fact.
Having to do with the workforce.
Yeah, that we really argue that we did have a formula for success in this country. And it goes right back to our founding. And this formula is built actually on 5 pillars. One is educate our population up to and beyond whatever the level of technology is. So whether it's the cotton gin or the supercomputer, we always educated our people to handle that. Second is immigration. Attract the world's best talent and most energetic people to come here and start 30 to 40% of the new companies in Silicon Valley every year, as you know, Charlie. Third is have the world's best infrastructure. Fourth is have the best rules for capital investing and for attracting capital and risk-taking and preventing recklessness. And lastly, government-funded research to push out the boundaries of knowledge so our entrepreneurs can come and pluck the best flowers and turn them into companies. That formula is repeated. It starts with, we see it in Hamilton, you see it in Lincoln, it goes all the way through until now. And now if you look at all 5, Charlie, they're all falling off the table.
Here's what's interesting, too, as you point out, is that after the Cold War ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union became Russia, all of a sudden the United States stood there, uno numero. But what we did not realize, taking words from your book, is that there were 2 billion new people looking for all the things that America had. And somebody was going to take note of that and build on it. And it wasn't necessarily us. What happened?
We did something, as we say in the book, that can be fatal. We failed to understand our environment. We took the end of the Cold War as a giant victory, and it was a giant victory, but it also presented us, precisely as you say, because it brought 2 billion new people into the global market and the global workforce, it presented us with a huge challenge. And we didn't recognize the challenge. We threw a party. And then came September 11th, and we responded as we had to respond, but we also over-responded. We went around chasing the losers from globalization and forgot about the winners in East Asia and forgot about dealing with our domestic challenges, which are ultimately crucial for dealing with the world. So we've had 2 decades of drift, and we've got to get back on track. We've got to get back to our 5-part formula that Tom noted. And that's the responsibility of the political system, but it's also the responsibility of all of us. So this book is written for our political leaders, but it's really written for citizens, because in the end, the responsibility for getting the country to focus on the things that really matter rests with us.
Our politics have failed us.
I think one of my favorite quotes in the book, I think Michael would agree, is from Mike Murphy. Mike, who's worked a long time political campaign consultant, worked with McCain.
Right.
Exactly. And Mike tells this story. Charlie said, he had a friend who was in the advertising business. And he came to him one day, I'm just paraphrasing, and he said, why did McDonald's never attack Burger King? Or Burger King never attacked McDonald's? And his friend told him, Mike, never kill the category. Why didn't Burger King ever say McDonald's hamburgers have maggots in them? No, Mike, never kill the category. And you know what happened, Charlie? Yeah. We killed the category of politics, and right when we need it most. Right when we need
kill it?
Basically with money, with gerrymandering of political districts, with networking and narrowcasting that divides the country, that rewards a kind of irresponsibility. You look at the country today, what's going on. We're having a financial crisis, and our politicians are having an election. And it's almost like the 2 circles are totally, they barely overlap. And what that tells you...
Why don't they overlap? I mean, we're on the eve here of the president making a big speech trying to say that, that he understands the economic collapse and that he's going to try to set forth a plan and try to garner support in the political arena to enact the plan.
Right. I think he's been trying to make it relevant, but I don't know the system has really been supporting him. I just give you a tiny example. Michelle Bachmann, I read yesterday or this morning, says she's going to bring back $2 a gallon gasoline. I mean, so
that some time ago.
yeah, I mean, that's right. Yeah, I mean, or whatever. And so what's happened is, it's clear to us that the people in that political system, you've had many of them around your table here. They're smart people. They're serious people in many cases, but they're clearly operating with certain incentives that aren't the same incentives of the country. And so that's why we argue in our chapter on politics that you need a third party. I'll let Michael talk about that. But the reason is, you got to change the incentives. We're big believers in incentives. You know, move the cheese, move the mouse. Don't move the cheese, the mouse doesn't move. We've got to move the cheese for the politicians.
And so how do we do that, Mike?
Well, let me just add to what Tom said. Our basic problem is that
It's what we got to do.
the political system, and this is something that political scientists have been saying for some time, has become much more polarized than the country itself. The base of each party is way on the flanks, far out from where the country is, and that's because of a series of social and political and economic trends over the last 40 years which go beyond any administration, any policy, any candidate. And because that's true, we believe that the political system is now unable to give us the policies we need, and it needs a shock from the outside. Now, if President Obama or Governor Perry or Governor Romney embraces the policies that we think are necessary, that's great. No one would be more pleased than we. But our argument is what's happened to the political system has trapped our politicians.
But tell me what you're recommending that President Obama is not for.
We need a serious deficit reduction package, and that means we've got to cut entitlements.
Well, he says he was prepared to cut
entitlements.
Well,
we haven't
Republicans say we haven't seen it.
We haven't heard from him, and in order to be able to do that, you've got to lead the country. You've got to get out front and say it. And that's taboo among Republicans. And you've got to be able to...
That's also
among Democrats.
That's also leadership.
You've also got to raise revenues, and that's taboo among Republicans. And there's yet a third component. We've got to spend more money on our formula. We've got to spend more money on infrastructure, according to one study that we cite. Just to get back to where we should be will cost us $2.2 trillion, and we've got to spend more on research and development. So we've got to cut, we've got to increase revenue, and we've got to spend more all at the same time. And our observation is the incentives of the political system are such that no political leader, even if he or she believes that, is able to say that and remain politically viable.
A person has a vested interest in finding out whether there was a viable third-party opportunity was certainly Michael Bloomberg, and was prepared to spend a lot of money to pursue it, said it's not viable. Now, have circumstances changed so you think Michael Bloomberg is wrong?
Well, let me tell you what we argue. An independent candidate, because there won't be a full-fledged third party, cannot be elected president. If you run as an independent candidate, you're not going to be president. What you can do is change the agenda of the country, because if you get enough votes on a radical centrist platform, the voters will be shown to be people who are dissatisfied with both parties but accessible to either. And if there are enough of them, both parties will have an incentive to co-opt that third agenda. Okay, but the most important thing, Charlie, to us is not a candidate, it's the agenda. This is the agenda we need to sustain American greatness. And if we don't have the political system embracing it, and we're not saying that Republicans and Democrats have to join hands and say kumbaya, there are always going to be disagreements. There should always be disagreements, because that's what democracy is about. But in order for the country to progress, we have to have disagreements about the relevant issues, and that's not happening now.
Another point about this around the corner is you went to China in 2010 to one of these World Economic Forum conferences in China, and you're in this magnificent place. And you think, God, they've got all this stuff. And then you had what thought?
Well, then I come home, and Michael and I live in Bethesda, Maryland, and I'm going to we take the subway to work, both of us often, and go to the subway, and the escalators there have been broken or in repair for 6 months, each one with 21 stairs. And I was just struck that it was stuck too, but that China had built this convention center in 8.5 months.
8.5 months.
And they were taking 6 months to repair 21 stairs in the escalator. And again, you know, as Michael said, this is not one of these, oh, if we're only China. No, no. China figures into this book on like 2 pages, I think. What we're trying to say is the feeling that's kind of inchoate out in the country. It started, I came home from a trip, I'd been at a convention, and I'd been with some high school students, and I said to Michael, I had a really interesting conversation with junior high school students. And I just said to them, like, and we quote one of them in the book, when I say China to you, you know, what does it evoke? And this one young woman just said, it feels like they have more will than we do. And so what we really argue in the book is China's become a mirror, the obsession with China. We had Governor Ed Rendell, you know, criticizing the NFL for canceling the Philadelphia Eagles-Vikings football game in December and saying we're a bunch of wusses. If this were China, they would have walked to the game in the snow doing calculus along the way. You know, so, but that notion, what we're saying is China's really become a mirror for us of things that we feel we once had. Particularly, Charlie, one thing, the ability to act collectively. Because all the problems that Michael talked about and the things we need to do, what they all have in common is they all require collective will. They all require collective action. We can't do this, you know, with one arm tied behind our back.
But another part of the story about going to China and coming back and the comparison with what's happening at the escalators in Bethesda, Maryland, is that you saw somebody who seemed to say that this is just the way it is. You really do have to worry about a sense of saying, well, that's the way things are. And so you therefore have to accept a new norm, which is...
Well, Charlie, we do not think we have to or should accept a new norm. We don't have to define America down. It's going to take us some time to dig out of this hole, but we can do it. We say in this book, and we mean it, we're optimists, although we're frustrated optimists.
Right.
And people have said to us, well, how can you be optimistic? And there are 2 reasons to be optimistic. One is our past and the other is our present. We have met challenges as a country before, challenges bigger than this one. One reason we're not meeting this challenge or these challenges is that they're kind of incremental and invisible. And one reason for writing the book is to alert people that we do have these challenges. And in the past, we have had this 5-part formula for success, which upgraded and updated has served us well and can again.
Is that another word for American exceptionalism?
Well, we talk about American exceptionalism. And that goes to the reasons for being optimistic that have to do with the present. What we say is America has been exceptional and can be exceptional again, but exceptionalism is not an entitlement. Exceptionalism has to be earned, and we can earn it. We say that if you want to be optimistic, stand on your head, because when you look at the country away from Washington, it's remarkable. We are, in many ways, still the people we were. We're full of energy, full of ideas, full of creativity, full of initiative, and we give examples of those people. The energy is there, it just has to be harnessed, and that is, among other things, a political problem.
Why isn't the president successful in creating the narrative, the pep talk, and having it resonate in a way that people will realize that they have to go back to what they were in order to become what they want to be again?
Well, you know, you said it earlier, Charlie. Obama seems to be in favor of all these things, and he was for a grand bargain, but we never quite got the details. You know what I mean?
That's a failure of leadership.
Yeah, exactly, and that's been my frustration, because I think in his heart he knows what needs to be done, in his head he knows what needs to be done, but there's way too much poll reading going on there, as far as I'm concerned.
So look, I mean, you're one of the columnists that he calls in to, he reads and seeks out your opinion. What happens in these conversations? In
my column and in the few opportunities I've had to talk to convey these things personally, you know, I think what I take away from the things the president said in public, you know, is that he feels we don't appreciate the opposition he's had. I'm just giving you his point of view, okay? That he's had a foe that has been basically out to obstruct everything he's done.
That's not new in American politics.
I would say the same, okay? And look, you know, I was talking to our friend Dov Seidman last night, and we were talking about the president's going to give a speech.
Right.
You know, and Dov made a good point. He said, for this speech to be successful, he said, Obama needs to get out there and make it clear to people, I'm offering you, I'm asking of you something so big, I can't finish the job. Not in 2 years, not in 6 years. That's how big this is that I'm calling, you know, and that's really what we're calling for in the book. That's what I've certainly been calling for in the column. Something so big, because folks, if we just stay here with this incremental approach, okay, we're going to just keep sliding in
so
this
this is a wake-up call as well as a pep
It's a
talk.
wake-up call and a pep talk.
So what should this president say in the speech that he's going to make?
I hope he says that we have to begin with the question, what world are we living in? We're living in a world with these 4 major challenges. We've been drifting for 20 years. In order to meet these challenges, we're going to have to sacrifice, and it's going to take some time. The president and his Republican opponents have to summon the better angels of our nature and the American record of rising to challenges. But I do want to add one other thing, Charlie. This is not a partisan book. We are tough on both Democrats and Republicans, and one point we make is...
Democrats were prepared to give everything away in terms of pensions and commitments that have a long...
It goes far beyond one budget deal. We're going to cut, even if there had been a grand bargain for $4 trillion, we're going to have to cut much more than that because of the costs of the baby boomer entitlement bill. If we wait around for one speech or one individual or one charismatic politician, we're going to be waiting for Godot. We're going to be waiting for somebody who doesn't show up. One reason, and we think an important reason, that Democrats and Republicans behave the way they do and are not responding to the challenges that we lay out in this book, let alone coming up with the solutions, is because of what has happened to our political system, which gives them the incentives to avoid these challenges. It's up to us. We have to change the incentive structure.
When you talk about this, and I was thinking about this today, you know, Steve Jobs, someone we all admire, who left, had resigned from the job of CEO, and all the comment that came in about him, it was that he did not read polls. Right. He did not do market testing. What he said is that I'll make a better mousetrap, and I know they will like it. So I can't do a market test because they haven't seen what I'm going to create for them. That's the test.
It's exactly the kind of leadership. That's a perfect analogy, Charlie. It's exactly the kind of leadership we're looking for. And we honestly believe that there is a market for that. Okay, I think there's a,
But the other thing though is that I'm not. I mean, you have to have boldness in terms of leadership and people who define an agenda, but you also have to have demand. The Arab Spring is a demand, did not come from leaders, it came from people who.
Charlie, you're absolutely right, and the purpose of this book is to try to help generate that demand.
Right.
That's
the
what
right demand.
That's what we hope people will take away from this book, and that's why we've
written it. And to realize that in collective action and will, there is power.
There's enormous power. We've done this before. You know, that's why the book ends, you know, by us saying that, you know, the history we need to read is our own. And the country we need to rediscover is America, okay? We've done this before. And the reason we're optimists, as Michael said, we call the chapter this country is still full of people who just didn't get the word. They didn't get the word that we're down and out. They didn't get the word that they're not supposed to start. So they go out and they start stuff and they invent stuff and they create stuff. You know, my favorite quote in the whole book is from a Marine who we interviewed and asked him why he was part of the surge in Iraq. We said, "Why'd you do that, sir?" And he says, "We were just too dumb to quit." This country is full of people too dumb to quit. But, you know, they're not being enabled, empowered, encouraged, and inspired by the political system. And we really think we're at a critical time, Charlie. You know, if we let this go, if we really, you know, get in this hole and can't get out, your kids won't just grow up in a different America. They'll grow up in a different world. And I don't want to be thought of as having been on duty when the American dream went dark.
And we left the country worse than it was when we came into it.
Absolutely. I think I know what we argue in the book, Charles, all these four problems that we talk about, deficit, energy, globalization, and IT. They all are unfolding incrementally. Yeah. Just slowly enough. I was watching TV this morning, the worst wildfires in Texas. Right. Okay, tragic. I mean, ever, I think, on record. Well, you think that doesn't have something to do a little bit with global warming, Rick Perry? I mean, you know, I tell you it does. In other words, but then the wildfires will go away, or the energy prices will go up, and then they'll come. But they're trending up. All these problems. What's so dangerous about them is that it's not like World War II. It's not like Pearl Harbor. They're all unfolding just slow enough for people to delude themselves, okay, that, you know, we're going to be okay, it's around the next turn, I don't really have to sacrifice that much, or I don't dare ask people. And that, again, gets to the leadership point Michael's making, which is that that's the job of a leader, to tell us where we are now. When was the last time you heard a serious politician, leader in this country, tell the truth so raw that you just want to get up out of your seat and say, wow? You know, when was the last time? I can't remember.
Answer your own question.
I mean, I have to really think. Was it Bill Clinton?
A political leader that you think is capable of achieving this kind of result? I mean, whether it's a governor or a member of state legislature, or whether it's someone who has the voice but's not in politics? I mean,
you know, no one comes immediately to mind, but, you know, I think Michael Bloomberg's been one of the closest as mayor here. But that's what you see. Look, Michael referred to shock therapy. We're going to get a shock. It's either going to come from the market, or from Mother Nature, or from the middle, okay, the middle of America. But we're going to get a shock, because this thing just keeps drifting.
And what will a shock look like?
Well, it could look like Europe breaking up tomorrow, and
this is
pulling
a great
us down.
point.
You know, I mean,
you remind me. So Europe breaks up, the world breaks up.
China now is going through a whole different transition, and we're going through a transition. All four pillars of the world, are going through
at the same time,
and all more interconnected than ever. And that's what's really scary about this moment. China's leadership bargain's changing. Ours has to change, okay? The Arab world is going through a fundamental transformation. It's going to be with us for another 100 years. And China and Europe is going through the same thing. And so we're at a really unstable time. And that's why, doubly so, we're saying to people, this is when you need a strong America, okay? We are unabashed patriots, okay? We actually come from that school that is proud to say and truly believes, okay, that a strong America is good for the world. Not that we don't make mistakes. It's not that we're perfect. We're so far from perfect, we can't see perfect, okay? But we are a hell of a lot better than anybody else. And I would much prefer a world ordered by an imperfect America, okay, and held up by an imperfect America than any of the options on the table.
I was trying to remember, since you and I have done this so often, what was it you said once? I'd like to be president of China for an hour, for a day.
And then I said, actually, I would be happy even for a minute. You know, it's just
because you could order things to be done.
Because you could get things done. But then what I quickly said is, I actually don't want to be president of China for a day. I don't want us to be China for a day.
Yeah.
I want us to be America. I want our system to work with the same focus, authority, and stick-to-it democratically that China does by ordering it autocratically from the top down, and that's our frustration. As we say in the book, we think we have the superior political system to China. Unfortunately, right now, China's getting 90% out of their inferior system, and we're getting about 50% out of our superior system. Because look at everything coming out of Washington. It's all suboptimal. Well, how long do we remain a great power when all that our political system can produce are suboptimal solutions? That's got to add up, and it is adding up.
Is there an Obama foreign policy?
You know, I think maybe the broader question, and Michael teaches American foreign policy, is there an American foreign policy? And even maybe a bigger question is, can there be? That is, are all these problems so ad hoc and each one off, you know, and our resources increasingly limited, that it's hard to speak about some containment, that is so clearly defined foreign policy. I think all in all, I would give Obama a fairly good grade, a high grade for foreign policy, for managing. I think the drawdown in Iraq, the drawdown in Afghanistan, I disagreed with what he did, but the war on.
But you're accepting the withdrawal strategy that he's laid out in terms of
how he dealt with Libya, exactly, and how he's dealt with getting Bin Laden, pursuing the war on terrorism in a way that seems to be sustainable. In a really complicated situation. I don't think the country has been ill-served by his leadership on foreign policy at all.
And the relationship with Russia? Resetting?
Yeah, the best you can with Russia. Look, they've got a lot of oil, and as long as they've got a lot of oil, Putin's going to be extremely truculent, and he's going to be he's going to do whatever he wants to do. But we've managed the situation with China. We've managed it with Russia. Right now, you don't sit here and say there's some burning Obama foreign policy failure out there at all.
Finally, this. Just teeing this up for you here. I'm just teeing up right here. With the ball on here. Okay, tee this up. Does this book have a happy ending?
Whether or not it has a happy ending depends on us. It's all on us. It can have a happy ending if we recover and renew our formula for success, if we go back to the values that made us great, if we act together to meet the challenges of the day as we have so often in the past. If we learn from our history, then we can master these challenges and we can continue to be exceptional. If we remember what it was like to be us, if we remember what used to be us, then we can be us again.
There is something what happened in the Arab Spring. I mean, that things do come from the bottom up. And, I mean, the American Revolution came from the bottom up. It was not, you know.
I think you're going to see it, Charlie. You know, I've written about Americans Elect, this third-party movement, you know, on the internet that's starting. You know, one of the points we make in the book is that, you know, the internet's leveled every hierarchy except one: American politics, the two-party system. Right. And I don't think that's going to last. And I think the country's in a revolutionary mood. And if Obama or another leader, he's our president now, so I hope it's him, you know, the more honest he is, I mean, the more raw honesty is about where we are, what it will take, and what he's ready to do to make it happen, I think the more people will respond. But the more he dances between the raindrops, tries to tactically get this or that there, I think the more he's going to suffer, and I think the country's going to suffer.
Tom Friedman, Micheal Mandelbaum, that used to be us, how America fell behind in the world it invented, and how we can come back. Thank you. Great to see you.